Honorable members before serve.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I take my point of departure from an earlier statement made by the member for Castries South. And that pertains to the extraordinary nature of this loan. We are making history, Parliament is making history, or the Minister of Finance more appropriately is making history on two counts. The first count, Mr. Speaker, is this, that this is the first time that the government of Saint Lucia is guaranteeing such a massive loan for an infrastructure project in Saint Lucia. I cannot recall in the financial history of Saint Lucia when the government has ever guaranteed stroke borrowed money to that amount. So that is history. The second, Mr. Speaker, is the Bank of Saint Lucia. Again, I'm open to correction, and I will come back to that, Mr. Speaker, in a few minutes. I cannot ever recall the Bank of Saint Lucia agreeing to make a loan of that amount to any government of Saint Lucia until this loan. That is history. $202 million. Of course, the bank has borrowed significantly, has lent rather, Mr. Speaker, significantly in the past. But this is the first time, as far as I can recall, and I submit myself to historical correction, that the bank has lent the government that amount of money for a single project. Mr. Speaker, as a member for Castries South rightly noted, and I'm a little confused myself, the motion before us speaks to a loan from the Bank of Saint Lucia. But in his presentation, the Minister of Finance indicated that it would be a syndicate of banks. Now, on the one hand, if it is a syndicate of banks, then of course it eases other concerns that one may have, that is to say, for the implications of the portfolio of the Bank of Saint Lucia, which I shall come to. But the question remains. The question remains. Who comprise the consortium? Is it that we have a situation where the government of Saint Lucia has entered into an agreement with the Bank of Saint Lucia, and it is in that agreement that there is agreement by both parties that the bank will be the lead bank and there's a consortium? But the question still remains, Mr. Speaker. The Bank of Saint Lucia is not a foreign bank. It's a local bank, except to say that a percentage of shares is owned by Republic Bank of Trinidad and Tobago, and when they do acquire the Bank of Nova Scotia, then the question will be, what do they do with the shares in the Bank of Saint Lucia? Because for them to have shares in the Bank of Saint Lucia while they're operating the Bank of Nova Scotia would clearly be incongruous and would yield a significant conflict of interest and conflict of competition. So the question, Mr. Speaker, is who are the members of this consortium? And it is usually the case that if you're going to go by way of a consortium, then you need to protect it legally by making mention of it in the motion before the House. That's what the issues about openness and transparency has been with matters of motions of that kind. And I don't have to go back into that history. But the Minister of Finance, in his statement, also gloats over the fact that this is all local. But we need to stick a pin, Mr. Speaker. In the last few sittings of the House, we have borrowed heavily from local banks. Now, what is the message that we are sending? Obviously, obviously, one would have thought that with a loan of $202 million, that this would be a perfect opportunity for external investors, whether within CARICOM or whether outside of CARICOM, would have jumped at the opportunity to invest. Why? Why? If your credit rating is so good, the regional securities market applaud you, pay you low interest rates, and I don't know whether the history bears that out from what the figures I'm seeing, but leave that for the time being. Then surely this is also an opportunity to finance it by bonds. Question is why? But we also know, Mr. Speaker, that the foreign banks in St. Lucia have made it quite clear that they will not invest anymore in government paper. They have said so, and government instruments. Unless, of course, there's a dramatic change in policy that we don't know nothing about. So why not them? Why not them, since they are part of the landscape? And I believe, Mr. Speaker, that since the Bank of Saint Lucia is a public bank owned by shareholders, that the government has a duty to say who is part of the consortium. But, Mr. Speaker, this House seeks reassurances, and it's a matter I touched on in a previous engagement in this House, the state of health of the Bank of Saint Lucia. Now, Mr. Speaker, I will say to you that politicians are always cautioned about statements they make about banks. I remember a former minister in the office of the Prime Minister, minister in the Ministry of Finance, made certain statements about the Bank of Saint Lucia and some individuals. Yes, I think the leader of the opposition is reminding me he had to retract the statement for him. But today, Mr. Speaker, if the Bank of Saint Lucia is going to lend the government of Saint Lucia $202 million, then very clearly in this Parliament, the health of the Bank of Saint Lucia has to be an issue. It is not a debate that we can sidestep or ignore. Mr. Speaker, of all the members of this House here today, I guess I am the only one with direct memory of what occurred in St. Lucia in 2011, 2012. Of course, the member for Swazelle may be able to embellish that memory because of his then position at the Bank of Saint Lucia. But, Mr. Speaker, that bank was on the verge of collapse. And of all the things any Prime Minister will handle in the course of his stewardship, there will be things that at best will stand out. Things perhaps that take you to the brink and you look down, see where you are going, you have to pull back and make decisions in the interest of the country. And there will always be moments, perhaps, when you might feel overwhelmed, you might feel frightened, you might feel uneasy, unsure of what the consequences will be. The Bank of Saint Lucia was one of those episodes, Mr. Speaker, because what in fact had occurred was that one, the bank had to declare after an audit massive losses of several millions of dollars, among other things because of failed projects and also, Mr. Speaker, of investments that had gone bad. It was fair that once the information had become public, the bank may have collapsed. The IMF and the World Bank descended on St. Lucia because there were fears of the contagion that had started in Antigua, had gone to Anguilla, would have come down to St. Lucia and then spread across, of course, to St. Vincent to some extent. To the credit of the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank and the then Governor, Sir Dwight Venner, a plan was developed to deal with that situation to prevent panic from setting in. And again, the honorable member from Sozelle will know that part of that plan was that persons had to be sent down to all the branches of the Bank of Saint Lucia to monitor account holders, to calm fears, calm anxieties. Calls had to be made to large depositors in St. Lucia to calm them and ask them to leave their deposits in the Bank of St. Lucia so that we could ride over that very difficult period. Now, Mr. Speaker, as a direct result of those massive losses and that near miss, the Bank of St. Lucia experienced losses for I think 6 to 7 years, until of course gradually those losses were narrowed. But it was a huge challenge to deal with the capital asset ratio of the bank and to deal with it and ease the bank out of the perilous situation that it found itself in. Now what do we have here? It's my understanding that earlier this year the bank issued dividends for the first time in 6 or 7 years. Again, I stand to be corrected whether it's 6 or 7 years. Perhaps it's a signal of return to some kind of health, although I'm fully aware that shareholders have been very uncomfortable because they have not been receiving their dividends. But what puzzles me is this rather generous interest both during the construction phase and in the post-construction phase. Oh, of course, we have been told that this is the government that are masters at negotiation. They know how, they have gifts of negotiation. They can make the impossible possible. And I don't know whether the member for Castries Southeast, I mean, I've never seen him break out in such robust laughter when I'm speaking. I mean, he is obviously enjoying himself by my mere mention of these words. Now, of course, the member for Babuno should have looked straight at me and try not to look to his right to be similarly tempted. Now, Mr. Speaker, the question is, what has changed? What has changed? If I'm correct, that this is the largest loan ever conceded by the bank for a single project. And let us not forget that the government of St. Lucia holds directorships in that bank. Let us not forget. I believe that the Bank of St. Lucia owes it to the shareholders to issue a statement from the board of directors that they have assessed this loan, they have assessed the fundamentals of this loan, and they are satisfied beyond all reasonable doubt that it was a right and proper loan to grant. Mr. Speaker, when you see these banks go under, as happened in Antigua, Anguilla, and nearly happened here, it's always the government that has to handle the bailout. Always. And I recall the many nights that had been spent here working out, if perchance that bank had collapsed, how we would handle the payout if, as I said, it had collapsed. Thanks God it never happened. But given the history of the bank, I believe that the directors, the board of directors, must issue a statement indicating to its shareholders that the fundamentals of this loan are correct. Mr. Speaker, there's this matter of SLASPA, again, that was raised, and I think it was raised at the previous session of the House. I remember that I had raised it, and I noticed that the member for Castries South raised it again. This loan means that SLASPA is borrowing $472 million. And I'm not going to go into the arithmetic about whether $35 in the lockbox is going to pay both of these loans, the Taiwanese loan as well as that. I'm not going to do that. No, at least not for the time being. But what it does mean is that SLASPA can say goodbye to any other development project in this country. Because nobody's going to look at the SLASPA's balance sheet after that loan appears on its balance sheet. So whether we like it or not, we are condemned if you're going to do any work with any of these ports. They'll have to come from the private sector, and we'll see whether it's going to be PPPs. Because SLASPA will have no capacity at all to generate any loans to finance any development of any port in this country after that. That's a thing, that's a reality. And it is for those persons who are in the management of SLASPA to take the risks and for them to have wide open eyes as to the consequences of the decision that they're making. Mr. Speaker, I would not support this motion before the House. Not that it matters. It doesn't matter. Like everything else in this House that don't matter. Even when legislation is putrid and full of errors, and it is drawn to the attention of members of the House, they don't take the opportunity, the generosity on this side to clean up the legislation. And of course, I've been told, I'm not going to make it again recognition of clean up legislation. Leave it as it is, Mr. Speaker. So it is pointless to raise these issues. But I believe, Mr. Speaker, I understand that the opposition plans to put in place a team to monitor this loan from start to finish. I compliment the leader of the opposition for this major step, and I believe that it is the right thing to do to put a multidisciplinary team to monitor this loan, including all the underlying arrangements from start to finish. Mr. Speaker, we all try to make our own history. Politicians love all kinds of legacies. Soon, the time will come when you have to talk about legacy. But let me say this, Mr. Speaker. Let me say this. Let us hope that this project is not a noose around the necks of St. Lucians. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.